A discovery within the United States could be changing geopolitics as we know it. My friends, let me ask you a very simple question. What if the next cell phone that you planned on buying was suddenly going to cost 3 times more than a new phone does today? Or how about if you went to buy an electric car next year and found out that all of a sudden it costs several thousand more dollars than you ever actually budgeted for previously? Or how about if your government's military needed very specific materials for its weapon systems in order to protect its citizens in the first place, yet the very people that they had to buy those materials from were in fact their geopolitical opponents? It might sound crazy, but my friends, that is exactly what is happening right now. At the end of this last year, in December of 2023, China would ban the export of technology that is used to extract and separate rare earths, this being something that would be a further step towards protecting its dominance in several strategic metals. Because for anyone who is unaware, China is the world's top miner and processor of rare earths, and it would like to stay that way, or rather it needs to stay that way. And let me explain. First off, before I explain the massive geopolitical event that has happened, I need to first explain what rare earths are and how they're used, because you need to understand just how big of a deal this is in the first place. Also, everyone, before we continue with the video, I just wanted to thank everyone that has been booking the early bird spots for the trip that I'm going to be leading up here to Germany and Austria this November. The spots are rapidly disappearing, and I am getting more and more excited to be able to explore the German and Austrian Christmas markets with all of you. For those of you who haven't signed up yet, I would recommend doing so because the first 8 people to sign up do get a $200 discount, which is something that is really helpful. And a lot of those spots are already taken, so you should probably secure it while you can. If Germany and Austria aren't really your speed, I'm also going to be leading a trip here to Peru, which there are still some spots available for that. And if none of those trips are possible for you, then I am also getting into LARPing. So if you want to join me in like a fantasy battle and start thwacking people with foam swords, well, I'm going to be participating in the Reckoning here in Kentucky. The links to all these things as well as Discord are down in my description, so by all means go ahead and click that, and if you have any questions, just feel free to let me know, just message me. When going through this list, I'm probably going to be mispronouncing many of them, but the 17 are lanthanum, cerium, praseodymium, neodymium, promethium, samarium, europium, gadolinium, terbium, dysprosium, holmium, erbium, thulium, ytterbium, lutetium, scandium, and yttrium. The thing about everything that I have listed here is that all of these elements are known as lanthanides, and despite their rare designation when I call them rare earth elements, they're not, technically speaking, as rare as the name suggests. In fact, they're actually found in relative abundance, or at least use that in air quotes, across the world, with the highest concentrations of those being found in China, who is the world's leading producer of rare earth metals. Now, these rare earth metals can be further broken down into heavy and light categories, where heavy rare earth elements, or HREEs, are considered more valuable than the light rare earth elements, or LREEs. Both type of lanthanides are non-radioactive, and they are highly desired for many clean energy, for engineering, and for manufacturing technologies. These things are vital to these industries. Now, despite the fact that I say that these things are extremely important, that they are vital to all these industries, unlike minor metals that saw a rapid boom post-World War II, REMs didn't have such an important role prior to 1965, even though minor amounts of them were produced. As an example of that, when the first color television sets were being produced and appearing on the market, you can actually thank europium for that. This discovery and technological breakthrough would put the United States at the top for REM production. After all, at the time, it was really the only one who actually needed to produce REMs in the first place. However, as time went on, that was going to seriously change. Because in the 1980s and 90s, when Chinese factory output was exploding, they caught on and started to produce massive amounts of REMs, and from there, it is they who'd become the world's largest producer. Since then, many different countries and government agencies would recognize the importance of rare earth elements, and from there, they would begin to stockpile reserves, and from that, incorporate it into nearly every single aspect of defense, industrial, aviation, consumer electronics, and much, 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 much more. But as for why China over here was able to dominate the market so easily, the short of it is that they had the lowest prices for rare earth metals, which in turn would force competing mines around the world to stop production because it simply wasn't economical enough. This in turn was going to be amazing for China, because ultimately that means that they were going to be the only real power around that were going to be able to export this one product, and that level of control ultimately led China to being able to restrict REM exports and thus significantly increase the price for the materials, which is obviously not good for anyone who is outside of China, and this in turn would force the United States to try and figure out how to consume less REMs. And from there, also find alternative substitutions to try and produce products that don't require them. Still though, that's not an easy effort. Even with as much as has been done in recent decades, our reliance on REMs is only expected to triple by 2040, and as for why, I'm gonna have to explain that. A question many people may be wondering is, why should I actually ever care about rare earth metals? Well, the short of it is that rare earth elements, REEs, are necessary components of more than 200 different products across a wide range of applications, especially when it comes to high high-tech consumer products such as cellular telephones, computer hard drives, electric and hybrid vehicles, flat-screen monitors, televisions. You name any kind of moderately advanced tech, and that has REMs in it. If you look at things from a military or defense side of things, significant defense applications include electronic displays, guidance systems, lasers, radar and sonar systems, you name it, it has it. And that, my friends, is perhaps the key little detail. It has it. Weirdly enough, although the amount of rare earth elements that are used in a product may not actually be a significant part of the product by weight, like it could be 1 or 2% of it, that rare earth element could be necessary for the product to function at all in the first place. As an example, magnets. Magnets made out of rare earth elements may represent only a small fraction of the total weight, but without them, the spindle motors and voice coils on desktops and laptops, these things would not actually be possible. They would not work. Unfortunately, rare earths are essential for multiple sectors of defense. Lanthanum drives night vision technology and goggles and associated gear. Neodymium powers laser rangefinders that are used in sports such as hunting and golf, but also, when it comes to military precision-guided munition applications, this is something in which praseodymium is essential. Samarium is also incorporated into precision-guided weapons as well. And remember that whole thing when I was talking about magnets? Well, REM chemical combinations can be used as temperature-resistant magnets that have a huge role in aviation. Examples such as samarium cobalt and neodymium iron boron magnets, these are used in fin actuators for missile flight guidance and control systems, and as components in military computer-driven innovation. REMs are also used to produce armor, armor-piercing projectiles, smart bombs, fighter jets, electronic warfare, satellite communications, radar, sonar, optics, and much, much, much more. When it comes to automotive components, a variety of different REMs are used. Cerium is used to polish glass and mirrors, while neodymium modifies light transmission properties of headlight glass. Hybrid batteries use cerium and lanthanum, while electric motors and generators can incorporate a variety of different REMs, such as neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, and terbium. Rare earths are also used as a refiner in gas that is used to fuel internal combustion engines. What I was talking about before here with rare earth magnets, like that of neodymium iron boron, these are things that are used in sensors, and even ferrite magnets will contain small amounts of rare earths and minor metals like lanthanum and cobalt to improve magnet performance by as much as 25%. GPS navigation, touchscreens, power windows, and all the high-tech gadgets in new vehicles, all of these will at least have some kind of contribution of REMs in their making. Every single time you see a government or some kind of entity push an electric vehicle, every single one of these things is going to incorporate some type of rare earth element, which in the case of electric vehicles are going to incorporate far more than standard combustion engine vehicles. This is such a crucial thing that Toyota has had to, quote, come up with technology which would help conserve neodymium stocks. That is how high of demand we are talking here. While neodymium is largely used in offshore and onshore wind turbines, additional rare earths such as dysprosium, praseodymium, and terbium, and other critical metals such as silver, indium, and tellurium, boron, selenium, and cadmium are all so heavily needed in order to power solar panels. That is a lot of very specific metals. And as we said so from the very beginning of this video, when we opened things up in the first place, the most relatable electronic device that anyone on here that is watching is aware of is probably the cell phone. It is estimated that over 5 billion people now own mobile devices. And what rare earths are in smartphones? Well, neodymium, dysprosium, gadolinium, lanthanum, praseodymium, and terbium. Whether you are looking at the screens, the batteries, any of the other components in miniature personal devices such as tablets and laptops, all of these things are being used. They are used in the GPS, the signal application, fiber optic cables, whatever kind of tech that you are using, this is going to incorporate some aspect of it. REMs are used in hard drives, at the movie theaters, on camera lenses, sound amplification, flat screens, magneto-optic recording technology. The manufacturing, health, and advanced communication industries are extremely reliant upon REMs. They provide multiple benefits for space-based satellites and communication systems, and medical applications also include MRIs, X-ray, lasers, neutron radiotherapy, and various different drug treatments. But again, the most impactful use of these elements is easily their use in magnets. And I'm going to need to kind of explain that, because these magnets were developed in the 1970s and 80s, and they are easily the strongest type of permanent magnets that are made, producing significantly stronger magnetic fields than other types, such as ferrite or alnico magnets. As an example of this, on average, the magnetic field that is typically produced by rare earth magnets can exceed 1.2 teslas, whereas ferrite or ceramic magnets typically exhibit fields of only around half to 1 tesla. Now, I'm not a scientist or a physicist, so I'm not going to try to explain that, but you can understand Japan that it is at a minimum 25% stronger to up to over double the strength. By virtue of simple math. And so, okay, over the course of this video so far, I have pretty much explained what it is that rare earth metals are used in, why it is that they are valuable. And I hope that up to this point, for those of you who have stuck around this long, you can understand just how incredibly important these things are. Which brings us to the next question of which countries have the most rare earth reserves. This is historically one of the key reasons as to why China has been able to seize the market of rare earth elements. It is estimated to have 44 million tons of rare earth oxide, this being around 34% of the world's total reserves. Vietnam, Russia, and Brazil are each estimated to have just over 20 million tons each, while India has around 6.9, Australia has 4.2 million, and the United States was estimated to have 2.3 million tons. But okay, that brings us to another important question then. If everyone has so much supply and you don't really use a lot of something in this technology, why is China controlling so much of the world's supply? Why is it able to dominate everything? Well, let's go back to the 90s. In comparison to what we see today, in 1993, only 38% of the world's production of REEs were done in China. 33% was done in the United States, 12% was done in Australia, and 5% each was in Malaysia and India. Several other countries such as Brazil, Canada, South Africa, Sri Lanka, and Thailand would make up the remainder, but largely these ones that we just mentioned were the big producers and competitors. But for anyone who has seen any of my videos that I've done about Chinese economic history here in the past and how China's economy is a little bit broken, they would know that over the course of the 1990s, China experienced a massive economic boom. And from this, slowly but surely, the government would build up the infrastructure needed to both mine and refine rare earth elements at a level that literally no one else in the world could possibly compete with. After all, one of the key reasons that China was able to rise into power in the first place as the factory of the world was because of abundant, cheap labor. For the rest of the world's rare earth element producers, it just simply wasn't economical for them to produce it themselves anymore when they could buy it from China for a much cheaper price. And so the transition happened, and somehow most of the world's governments really didn't notice just how dominant the Chinese had become in this sector, at least not right away. And when I say dominant, I mean, oh my god, dominant. By the year 2008, China accounted for a whopping more than 90% of the world's production of rare earth elements. By 2011, China accounted for 97% of worldwide production. And this is where, before we actually continue with the rest of the video, that we should just take a moment to pause, time out for a second. I want you to think about something. If anyone, and I mean anyone, any country whatsoever, controlled 97% of any natural resource that wasn't just some kind of obscure element that isn't actually really used for anything, then a lot of people would probably have an issue with that in some shape or form. Like that 97% of a supply of something very important is controlled by a very, 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 very small group. Or in this case, one guy. But the most astonishing part about it is the speed at which this occurred. Remember what I said before about the 90s, in which China was responsible for only a third of production. In less than 20 years, the Chinese went from controlling 1/3 of total global production to 97% of all rare earth elements. That is an absolutely insane fact. Beginning in 1990 and beyond, maintaining supplies of rare earth elements became a key issue for countries across the world, as the government of China began to change the amount of rare earth elements that it would allow to be produced and exported. At the same time that this is happening, the Chinese government would also begin to limit the number of Chinese and Sino-foreign joint venture companies that could export rare earth elements from China. They knew that at this point, they could have a stranglehold on the market, and in some way, have control over the world's supply of a very precious commodity. And it makes you think, okay, alright, why? Why has no one done anything about this? Why are they letting it happen? What is going on here? Well, up until a certain event would happen, there really was no real concern about this. At least it wasn't at the forefront of people's minds. But, unfortunately for the Chinese, they ended up getting a little bit greedy, and they made a bold power play for the dumbest reason possible that would end up alarming the world's great powers from just accepting the status quo and actually trying to take decisive action. And that would be in 2010. In the year 2010, China would end up withholding exports of rare earths to Japan during a quarrel over disputed islands. Prime Minister Wen Jianbao would personally call for Japan's release of an incarcerated fishing boat captain who was detained after his vessel collided with two Japanese Coast Guard vessels about 40 minutes apart as he tried to fish in waters that were controlled by Japan, but had long been claimed by China. Beijing would respond to this entire incident by curbing global exports of rare earths, saying that that it was, quote, trying to curtail pollution and preserve resources. Japan, the European Union, and the United States would then successfully challenge China's action in a case at the World Trade Organization, but the damage had been done. The episode would lead Japan, which at this point had relied on China for virtually all of its rare earths, to instead have to find alternative suppliers, and from this would reduce the share of its imports of rare earths from China to 58% by 2018, which, mind you, is still over half, but in comparison to almost all, that is still better. But also, at the same time, that brings up a very important question. Why still 58%? Why is it that when countries around the world reduce what they need from China, they still end up needing stuff from China? Well, that's because it's very hard for these countries to raise up production. You see, my friends, the problem with rare earths is that while they are relatively abundant, they simultaneously occur in very low concentrations, and are usually found mixed together with one another, or in radioactive elements such as uranium and thorium. Not in, with. They're found with these things. The chemical properties of rare earths makes them very difficult to separate from surrounding materials, and the process of actually doing this can generate lots of toxic waste. There's an old saying regarding production in North America: regulations are written in blood. That means that for every strict regulation that exists in an industrial environment, even the things that you think are stupid, that rule was probably put in place due to someone dying or being maimed because of that rule not existing prior to that time. With China, though, well, the Chinese didn't have these kinds of problems because they didn't have the same environmental protections and regulations that those in the West had to deal with. There was no EPA to find them or stop them from just dumping the waste out anywhere that they pleased. There was no Chinese version of the old 90s animated hero Captain Planet that could swoop into Shenzhen and take pollution back to zero. But in all seriousness, though, one could almost weep in solidarity, or at least empathy, thinking about the sheer amount of stuff that leached into groundwater or the water table throughout China over the years, and what that might mean for the health of their people in the future and the environment going forward. It is not a pleasant thought. Aside from all of that, weak or non-existent environmental standards and regulations have enabled China to build its dominance in rare earths in recent decades, as Western producers just would leave the industry because it wasn't economical enough. It was simply too expensive and difficult to deal with the fallout and byproducts that were produced by many Western companies to actually stay in the industry. So if it really is that difficult, then what can be done? What are other countries going to do in order to try and reduce reliance on China? Well, Australia, Canada, the European Union, and the United States have set out policies and support packages for their critical mineral sectors, including rare earths. They've been scrambling since the Japan incident in 2010 to get their own mining and refinement infrastructure in place, and from that began to see results around the year 2017. Results that have only been improving over time. As an example, the United States' use of rare earth metals in national defense has acquired more interest in recent years, as 2019 has marked the official funding of commercial-scale rare earth production by the US military. The country's own resources and partnerships with allied countries will help to significantly satisfy the military's demand for rare earth metals. But that also, at the same time, highlights another nuance to the issue. It will help, but not actually solve the issue, at least not yet. Remember what I said here before, plenty of people around the world, plenty of these countries already have the materials, at least sort of. But what China really was smart about was controlling the refinement and production process. You see, my friends, it's one thing to control a resource. It's another thing to let that resource exist out of your control and in abundance, yet be the one and only group that you could turn to in order to actually make that resource useful. And just to give a comparison before I give an example, one of the key things that you could equate to this is the production of oil. Because even when oil is produced, it still needs to be refined. So countries that may be rich from harvesting oil in the first place may not actually be able to refine it, thus making it useful. An example of that for rare earths is the US-based MP Materials, which mines rare earths in California, and for years would have to ship their materials to China in order to process it in the first place. It was actually this year that the company would launch a separation plant in the third quarter and manage to produce 50 metric tons of neodymium praseodymium oxide, which they had been completely reliant on China for previously. And although many people who are watching this are probably not going to recognize the name of a mining company, a much more well-known example is that of the electric vehicle maker Tesla, because the automaker lawmaker would decide in 2022 that it just didn't want to deal with China's price volatility regarding rare earth elements, and from that point would attempt to fully remove rare earth elements in future models to try and mitigate environmental and supply risks, with obviously the biggest concern about it being getting the supply in the first place. And Tesla is really only one of the more recent examples of having this realization. The world's governments and corporations effectively had a choice on their hands in 2010. When China did this to Japan, they could either bend their knee to China regarding the price, no matter what that price may be, or they would be forced to build infrastructure and develop systems with which to both mine and refine these precious materials themselves. They could no longer be dependent upon China, which from that high point in 2008 that we talked about 97% of rare earth elements coming out from China, things have changed drastically since then. And I'm going to go ahead and give a breakdown of that here right now. Regarding mining, China would account for 70% of the world's mining production of rare earths in 2022. This would be followed by the United States, Australia, Myanmar, and Thailand. Regarding processing, China still manages to refine 89% of the world's neodymium and praseodymium, the key metals that are needed for electric vehicle magnets. This is a dominance that, though strong, is expected by 2028 to dip to 75%. And on that note, I have to specify that it's not like the amount of production in China is going down, because that's not the case. Chinese exports of rare earths during the first 11 months of 2023 would actually climb 10% on the year to 48.8 thousand metric tons. The United States does source most of its rare earth imports from China, but that dependence has eased to 74% between 2018 and 2021, down from 80% during the years of 2014 to 2017. China, as it stands, currently holds a significant lead in manufacturing and processing capability, with the United States coming in on a very distant second, generating about 1/6 of what China can produce, according to industry experts. In response to all of this, China would actually increase its rare earth mining quota for 2023 to a record high of 240,000 tons, which is up over 14% from 2022. The quota system, which is usually issued in 2 batches a year, was put in place specifically in response to China's long-standing problem with illegal mining, and it is now doing everything that it can to try and protect its mining interests. In order to protect its share of the market, China has been seeking to add more and more things to its catalog of technologies prohibited and restricted from export, such as smartium cobalt magnets, neodymium iron boron magnets, and cerium magnets. In addition to that, it had introduced export permits for chip-making materials gallium and germanium back in August of 2023, this being followed by similar requirements for several types of graphite December of 2023. As Don Schwartz, the CEO of American Rare Earths, which I'll be talking about here in a second, would say, China is driven to maintain its market dominance. This is now a race. The reason I bring up this specific guy is because of what I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Because the question remains, can the West actually catch up to China here? The move that China has made to protect its rare earth technology specifically comes as Europe and the United States are trying to wean themselves off, because China, from everything that we have discussed, accounts for still nearly 90% of global refined output, even if they are not mining it as much anymore. China has specifically mastered the solvent extraction process that is needed to refine these strategic materials. MP Materials and other Western rare earth companies, they've struggled to actually try and deploy this due to the technical complexities of it, and also due to the fact that it causes a lot of pollution. MP's goal of refining its own rare earth metals in 2020 ended up being snagged by COVID-19, and this, combined with technical challenges, would cause it to shift its target to, instead of 2020, be until the end of 2023. Late this last year, MP would say that it was commissioning refining equipment near its California mine as part of an intricate calibration process that so far hasn't managed to succeed, leaving the company reliant on China for still refining, and thus nearly all of its revenue. MP at the same time is also building a Texas magnet facility to try and supply General Motors that will require the California refining equipment to actually be operational. Another example is that plans for Australia's Lynas company to build a US rare earths refinery with a Texas-based partner, those collapsed. Lynas has said that it's trying to finish a rare earths refinery in Western Australia that has faced hurdles, and is thus building its own plant elsewhere in Texas. The thing that sucks about rare earth metals is that in order to determine their viability as a source worth mining, you have to locate a significant amount of them. Unlike other metals that are often found in ore deposits and veins that can be easily and economically mined, rare earth elements are typically found in alkaline and igneous rocks and are not detected via metal detectors. Other rare earth metals like europium, terbium, and yttrium, well, those can be found at the bottom of the ocean, which is kind of hard to get to in the first place. or fine. There is a new protein-based sensor that could be able to bind to rare earth metals and would change its fluorescence upon positive detection. That technology as it is oftentimes used to bind to calcium, but researchers have found that it's extremely effective for binding to lanthanides when a part of the sensor is exchanged with a protein instead. This right here may actually be the key for locating concentrated sources of REMs in the near future, and that then brings us to the news that inspired this video from this past month. Because my friends, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the US state of Wyoming. It's quite a pretty state, even if there are not many people in it, but what has been found in it is a lot more than people. An estimated 2.34 billion metric tons of rare earth minerals have been discovered there. And I want you to understand the sheer number that we're talking about here. That is 2.34 billion. According to American Rare Earths, which the CEO of that company we just talked about here before, that number is significantly greater than China's estimated 44 million metric tons of the minerals, which at this point means that China has had 34% of the entire world's supply, and that will mean nothing in comparison to what the US possibly could now. This would easily establish the United States as the world's largest supplier. In a technical report that was issued earlier this year, American Rare Earths, which is the US division of a Sydney, Australia registered exploration company, would disclose that it had discovered 64% more rare earth metals than it had originally speculated in a March 2023 land assessment. Donald Schwartz, the CEO of American Rare Earths, would explain the surprise upgrade to Cowboy State Daily, saying, quote, "Typically, you'll see the resource decrease as infill drilling takes place. Instead, we're seeing the opposite, with only 25% of the project being drilled to this point. The company here expects to be able to mine and process neodymium and praseodymium in particular, which is absolutely insane, and considering all the varying different materials that we've talked about, some of the most valuable and useful ones have been located in here, as the company expects to be able to mine and process neodymium and praseodymium in particular from the Wyoming deposits. But here's the thing. For anyone who has been watching this video all the way through this, don't expect a sudden dramatic increase in rare earth metal supply. From everything that I've explained here so far, you can understand why that is the case. As Schwartz would tell the newspapers at the time, the annual global demand for rare earth minerals is only about 60,000 tons. You don't really need much more than that technically. So if one goes and just builds a massive mine, well, the market cannot take all that material. That's just not possible. On top of all that, even if the United States has now potentially the largest source of rare earth metals in the entire world, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily able to process it. The real challenge remains, as refining these resources is simply not within the capabilities of the US at this point in time. And let me explain why the process is so difficult to replicate outside of China. Once an economically viable and high concentration source is actually found of rare earth metals, the first step is to create concentrated chunks from its raw form by using standard mining procedures that include crushing and scrubbing. When a concentrate has been formed, the chemically challenging process then takes place to try and attempt to separate individual rare earth metals. This process can include leaching, precipitation, dissolving, and various other purification methods specifically designed for individual earth elements. Depending on the type of element, various materials such as acids, radioactive chemicals, all of these different things can be incorporated during the extraction process, and it can be repeated either a couple times to several hundred times. The process that we're talking about here is naturally going to produce toxic waste, and that is just another challenge in producing rare earth metals. As we've already talked about, because of the serious lack of regulations that exist in China, the byproduct of these refinement processes, well, I mean, they never really worried about it. They just literally would return it to the environment as runoff and not have to actually care. Which I will say, if you just caught yourself being disgusted by that thought, then let me go ahead and stop you here for a second. Recently, this channel has made a few videos about China, and even had our most recent video about the country demonetized through no fault of our own. Every single time that we mention China, every single time we talk about anything with its history, there are many people in the comment section that end up claiming that we're just reiterating Western propaganda. To be fair to the Chinese, if you take a look at their historical, political, and economic development compared to where they were as a people in a country just 100 years ago, then things really do start to make more sense here. If you look at the stage of development that modern-day China is in, it's very similar to the Industrial Revolution time period that swept across the UK and the United States over the course of the 19th century. I'm sure that many of you are aware that during the Industrial Revolution, resources, refining, and production, these things were the hallmarks of society. The more profit that your company made, the more that you completely dominated a particular industry, the better you were seen. Worker safety regulations, as well as environmental regulations, these things were practically non-existent. And child labor was common and not really frowned upon for, quite frankly, a disturbing amount of time. And if you then look at China of the last 40 years, there are some very interesting parallels that one can talk about there. Understanding China's place in its own development can help us to understand the approach and methods with which China uses in order to operate in the economic world of today. Back during the Industrial Revolution, trade secrets were more protected and guarded than the actual lives of the employees. And from that, the same will then go for the refinement and production of rare earth metals. In fact, because of everything that we talked about here, China has gotten so good at the process of mining and refining rare earth metals that industry experts guess that it's going to take nearly a decade for countries from the West to even approach the efficiency and production capacity of the Chinese. The secrets of Chinese refinement processes is closely guarded, much in the same way as Taiwan and Hong Kong did decades ago with the research and secrets of semiconductor production. So that brings us to a very important question. What can actually be done about the situation? Well, there are a couple of different things that can be done to loosen the complete stranglehold that the Chinese have over the industry. The most common use for rare earth metals is in the use of magnets for electronic devices. If a substitute process or material could be found that can accomplish the same function as the current neodymium-based magnets, it would loosen the world's dependence upon the currently used REE components. Unfortunately, the other currently available magnets in the world that don't contain rare earth metals in them are up to 10 times weaker, so they're not really a viable option. The other thing is to recycle old technology to get the rare earth metals out of them, but unfortunately, the level of supply that we have is not nearly enough. If we took all of the old junk phones and PCs out and extracted the rare earth metals from them, it still wouldn't be enough to keep up with the increasing demand for these materials in their refined state. Perhaps in a decade, if we had enough of these previously used materials to begin recycling them on a mass scale, then it would work, but as of now, really no one in the West is seriously attempting to scale up any efforts to recycle these elements from existing sources in any large-scale capacity. It's simply not profitable enough. Either way, despite this discovery, which is massive, it would still appear that China still currently has an ironclad grip on the industry, something that the world is slowly awakening to and trying to fix, but a potential solution to that refining problem is probably not going to be seen for another decade. Still though, 2034, things could get interesting. My friends, this has been Stakuyi with the History of Everything podcast YouTube channel. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope that you like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know in the comment section below what it is that you'd like for us to do next. I really appreciate all of you for watching, and of course after this, since this is one that I already had written and was getting ready to work on, the next video that I'm going to be doing is actually going to be the Boeing one. I know that there were a lot of people that were messaging me very eager to talk about that, and I will be jumping into that next before it is that we move on to another geopolitical issue. If there's any particular topics that you would like video-ons, that you want to know the stories behind, again, let me know in the comment section below because I always love to hear from you all for what it is that you'd like to cover. So thank you, my friends, and I will see you next time. Goodbye, guys.